Uh, Thank you for coming, everyone. Today, I'd like to make a presentation on the cyber hygiene hunting. Thank you for coming today. Before going to deep dive to the session, let me introduce myself. My name is Tomo, lead cybersecurity architect in Tokio Marine Holdings, and I'm 14 years experience in the offensive and defensive areas. Also, I have the certification junkie, actually. I have a bunch of the certification right now. And also, usually as an extra activity, I do the speaker or maybe translator of the technical books into the Japanese while doing that kind of stuff. Today, I'd like to make a presentation on the cyber hygiene hunting. Maybe you are not familiar with this word, but basically, basic concept here is that we'd like to apply the proactive approach, such as cyber hunting, threat hunting, into the cyber hygiene domain. This is the basic concept we have. So today, we'd like to divide it into this section into the three parts. First of all, I'd like to mention about it the theoretical part, which is what is a cyber hygiene hunting, what is the background stories, and also what kind of the approach we have. And second of all, I'd like to mention about it how to operational cyber hygiene hunting. And finally, we'd like to share the case study in the real world. I'd like to touch on one by one. Okay, first of all, the theory. First of all, in the theory, but before going to the deep dive to the cyber hygiene hunting, try to be on the same page. We need to share this slide. The goal of the security professional is basically reducing the cyber risk. So basically, if you say the cyber security risk, we have a three component, which is a threat and the vulnerability and asset. Basically, the threat, like the APT something, will be attacked to the try to steal or destroy the asset. And then if there is a vulnerability on your system, the asset will be stolen or destroyed. So that is why we'd like to, in order to decrease the cyber security risk, we'd like to touch on each elements. But if you consider the reality, I actually work in the private sector right now, so which means that we cannot eliminate the threat, actually. We cannot do that. We are not law enforcement. Also, in terms of the asset, but actually the asset is kind of the business enabler. What does it mean? That we cannot remove it from that. Definitely, we have to keep it in our environments. So what I mean is that security professional only touch on the vulnerability itself. So that is why we'd like to do the cyber hygiene in the real world. Here, the cyber hygiene hunting is defined here. Actually, I define the proactively and iteratively verify the status of cyber hygiene and security posture that will lead the future intrusion. So basically, this approach is basically proactively find out the cyber hygiene. So this is what I mean. So why cyber hygiene hunting is a key. So I'd like to share the background story of my company, actually. I'm working on the Tokio Marine Group. It's actually insurance company, which means that we have a lot of the personal identifiable informations or personal health information, actually. Also, we are seller of the cyber insurance, so which means that we have to take care of the many data, actually. Also, in terms of the operation side, we are deploy the operation into the 46 countries in the worldwide, and we expanded the business in the merger and the acquisition. What does it mean is that there is a bunch of the branches, bunch of the group company in our groups, but we have, from the holding side, we have to take care of all of these things. Also, in the unique culture in my company is that governance model is federal governance model. So usually, this is kind of a unique feature in our company. So basically, we'd like to respect that group companies' cultures, original process, original system. So which means that each GC has their own security problem, even after the merger and the acquisition. But from holding side, I'm working on it. So need to have a method to verify that each GC security program is correctly works. So that is why we try to consider, so this is the background story, the reason why we try to consider the cyber hygiene hunting. Also, in terms of the cyber hygiene hunting should be adaptive. Let me explain in much more detail. So actually, many companies have their own cybersecurity strategy, but we have the be adaptive strategy. So basic concept here is that it's a be flexible and be proactive in the cyber risk management. So basically, the defense model will be outdated quickly. Actually, in the DEFCON or RSA, there's a bunch of the evasion technique or new technique is available, actually. And also, the security landscape is changing. So that is why we try to make sure that we try to keep the adaptive architecture or adaptive threat security postures. So in order to be adaptive, we try to satisfy the following three principles. The first principle, which is the proactive approach, as I mentioned about it. So we try to tackle on the each risk element. I'd like to explain later. And second of all, we'd like to mention about it is continuous approach. I'd like to explain much more detail. Thirdly, evidence-based approach by tools. So I'd like to explain how we implement in the cyber hygiene hunting. In the principle one, it's a proactive approach in the risks. So actually, in order to decrease the cybersecurity risk, we'd like to touch on the each element. So what I mean is that in terms of the threat, we have threat hunting. There's a great session or great workshop in the whole this week, actually. And also, we'd like to tackle on the vulnerability side, which is cyber hygiene hunting. This is the kind of that we'd like to use the both methodology to control the risk, actually. So if you do share the threat hunting, so maybe some people want to know about what is the differences, what is the similarity on that one. I'd like to make a comparison chart here. So if you say the threat hunting, so threat hunting is a bunch of the definitions. Each vendor has each definition, but actually I like the SecureWorks definition here. It said to proactively and iteratively discover the current or historical threat that evade the existing security mechanism. So what I mean is that basically it's focused on the threat, and the viewpoint is a past or kind of a present. So, and also the outcome, which is called the IOC, which is indicator of the compromises. So on the contrary, in the cyber hygiene hunting, much more focused on the future side. So the target is a vulnerability, but we try to focus on the potential failure, which cause a future intrusion. So that is why viewpoint is a kind of the future, and also the outcome, which is called the enabler of the compromises. So much more is focused on some sort of the failure, misconfigurations, account management failure, and so on. We'd like to focus on this part today. Also, if you say about it, the typical question here, cyber hygiene, we do the vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, red team operation. So we had already do that. But I'd like to say that cyber hygiene hunting is not VAPT or red team operations. Actually, VAPT is one of the components, actually. But if you consider about the red team operation, for example, usually, majority of the organizations do the red team operation once a year, right? So because the preparation, we need some sort of preparation, lack of the resources. So that is why if you do the penetration test, it's good, but it's kind of the snapshot approach. So maybe the result maybe the result will be 1 year before, and then it's not describe the current posture, actually. So that is why the cyber hygiene hunting, it's not VAPT. It's VAPT is a part of the cyber hygiene hunting, but it's not equal. Cyber hygiene hunting is much more wider perspective. Also, I actually define the cyber hygiene hunting is a continuous and evidence-based approach by enabling compromises. So that is why, of course, we focus on the vulnerability, but we'd like to focus on the account management status or attack detection capability, much more wider concept we'd like to propose. And second of all, the importance of the continuous approach. As I mentioned about it, try to be adaptive. We'd like to make sure that the current status. So in order to understand the current status of cybersecurity postures, we'd like to include a concept which is called the CM and CI, continuous monitoring and continuous improvement. So basically, we'd like to continuously check the cyber hygiene status by using the tools, and we'd like to improve about it. So this is the second principle we have. Finally, this is the evidence-based approach. This is the kind of the famous word we have in the Sherlock Holmes, the data, data, data. I cannot make a break without the clay. So what I mean is that if you understand the security posture, we need the data or evidences. So we'd like to also, as I mentioned previously, we need a continuous approach. So that is that we utilize the tools for the evidence-based approach. In our approach, we'd like to, first of all, take the actual validation, which means the stop to the using the checklist. So actually, I don't want to say the checklist is bad, but it's very quickly understand the situation. But the checklist cannot identify the operational error or unclear scope of the role and responsibility between the vendors and your companies. Also, different recognition of the stakeholders. So this situation, the checklist cannot review these kind of the stuff. So actually, we have a bunch of the exploration. If you do the deploy the checklist, ask the GC to answer the checklist. It's a group company says it's okay, okay, okay. But actually, if we discuss continuously, sometimes we have some sort of the argument that this looks not true, or maybe it's true, or that kind of the argument that will be happening between the DC. But if you do the actual validation, we have a clear evidence, like kind of a scientific evidence on that one. So what I mean is that we get much more clear view on what the security posture is. Also, if you have the checklist, maybe the 6% is satisfied, which means the 40% is failed. In this situation, it is difficult to set up the goal. Maybe increase the 60% to the 80%. It might be good, but it's a little bit less confident that it's improved the actual security. But if we do the actual validation method, so we have a tangible and clear goal on that. So we can easily set up the goal. This is the first point on that. And second of all, as I mentioned about it, in order to have the real-time, in order to have the continuous approach, we need a real-time visualization. So as I mentioned about it, VAPT sometimes doing once a year, sometimes, so it's not workable to understand the situation. So by using the tools, we try to realize the continuous monitoring and continuous improvement. So this is the kind of a theory and background of a cyber hygiene hunting. So nextly, I'd like to mention about it, how to operationalize cyber hygiene hunting. So if you understand the cyber hygiene hunting, what is the scope and how to validate it? So if the question is in the different phases, what kind of enabler of the compromise is in the scope? So if we consider about it in my company, we'd like to borrow the idea from the pyramid of the pain that we in the IOC world. I think the majority of you guys know about it, what is the indicator of the compromise and also the pyramid of the pain. But if you recap on that one, actually the pyramid of the pain is created by David Bianco 2013 or 14. He defined 6 types of the IOC and also discussed the relationship between the indicator of the compromise. He created some sort of pyramid and there is a 6 types of theirs and discussed the relationship between the indicator of the compromise. We borrow this idea to the cyber hygiene hunting world, which is enabler of the compromise world. Actually, this is a kind of a tentative idea, but we'd like to define the 9 categories of the enabler of the compromise. In the top of that, there is a kind of the AD security, IAM, control failure, misconfigurations, or vulnerabilities, or deviations, data postures, the human factors, or third-party risk management. So actually, we defined the 9 layer of the enabler of the compromise. So actually, the layer is actually mean that in the lower layers, actually, if you consider of the human factors or third-party risk management, we have a bunch of the number of the scope actually. Usually, the company heavily rely on the third party. Actually, we use a bunch of the third party or supply chain. So there's a wide range on that. Also, in terms of lower layer, it's much more initial access here. For example, the human factors. For example, clicking the suspicious link or malicious contents, for example, it's kind of a much more initial phases. On the lower layer is much more uncontrollable. For example, of course, you know that it is difficult to manage the third party, of course. And also, in terms of the human factors, we don't have a patch to the human being to not click the malicious contents, of course. So that is a little bit uncontrollable. Of course, we have an awareness program, but a little bit sometimes difficult to control it. On the contrary, if you're going to the top, it's much more controllable. It's core to the crown jewel. What I mean is that basically, it's much more core to the crown jewel. It's much more post-exploitation phases. Also, in terms of AD security, it's a little controllable. So this is a kind of a hypothesis right now, but of course, you have many comments on that one. But currently, we create some sort of hypothesis, and we try to do in the program. Also, if we define the 9 categories of the enabler of the compromise, we can define the method by each of the enabler of the compromise. Of course, easy one is the Active Directory security that we use the AD audit tool, for example. We defined a couple of the methodology to gain the real-time visualization. Okay, so nextly, I'd like to share the case study on that one. The case study is basically we'd like to share for example, what in the cyber hygiene hunting program in our companies. The first one, which is the Active Directory security. The majority of you guys know that Active Directory and domain account is very commonly targeted in the APT attack. Also, the proper management is important. It's actually the attack in terms of the attack vectors. There's a couple of exploitation way. It's kind of a golden ticket, server losing, SLP lost, or many ways to exploit it. On top of that, there's a vulnerability, like kind of zero logging, or many famous vulnerability there. So also, the Gartner mentioned that 2022, actually, the ITDR is the next trend, which is identity threat detection and response. Basically, the majority of the exploitation is caused by the abuse of the credential and the identity threat detection response is a key. So in terms of that, managing the account or Active Directory security is, of course, important. There is a couple of commercial tools and open source tools here. Actually, we have a bunch of research on that. And actually, if you see the GitHub, there's a couple of scripts on that one. And I'd like to share the kind of pin castle example. Actually, the author of the pin castle is the presentation, have a presentation yesterday. Actually, I borrowed a screenshot from the home pages, but actually it's visualized the Active Directory security, and we'd like to visualize what's going on. It is possible to visualize what's going on, and also get the list of the vulnerability actually. So of course the other tools can doing the same stuff. So, but actually by using the tools, try to have the posture of the active security is a one part. The next case study, which is the security control validations. So one of the cyber hygiene perspective is that whether or not security control is correctly works. So if one of the ways to check it is the penetration test or red team operations. But one of the negative side of the penetration test or red team operation is that they deep dive into some specific attack route. However, in terms of the coverage, they cannot try the all stuff, actually. They focus on a much more deep dive approach, actually. Of course, we have a limitation of the resources or limitation of the time. So in terms of the covering the coverage of the attack, we actually use the breach and attack simulation. If you're not familiar with the breach and attack simulation, basic concept is we deploy the agents and the control server. And then control server asks the agent to do some sort of the attack. Maybe in this cases, ask the control server request the attack to the network agent here, and then doing the command and control communication to the internet agent. In this communication, the proxy or firewall might be detected. So if there's a detection or prevention, the log will be synchronized to the SIEM environments, and control server see the SIEM and whether or not these actual attack emulation is correctly prevented or detected or identified. So this is the kind of a basic concept here. There's a couple of the commercial tools. Also, in terms of the open source field, kind of Red Canary admin-led team has a great job. Actually, we actually use it. So there is kind of a bunch of the scripts, a very small script to try some sort of malicious activity, and then we can check whether or not security control correctly works. Also, MITRE Caldera is another option to do that. So after doing these tests, we try to visualize the result or put the data into a MITRE attack framework. So this is the kind of the heat map chart here. And we try to create some sort of heat map. And then if we create a heat map, we understand that which part is protected, which part is weak. So we understand the situation by creating these kind of the heat map. Also, if you have the GIS heat map, we can leverage the outside of the data, actually. So actually, in the one day, senior leadership asked, hey, there's a ransomware is very widely common right now. Do you say that our environment is resilient to the ransomware? It's kind of a vague question, but usually senior leadership do that kind of questions. But in these cases, well, we try to leverage the data of the outside, actually. For example, one of the examples is here. It's kind of a group IB have a great research paper on the ransomware white papers. And they have analyzed, I think, the 10 famous ransomwares, and they create the MITRE attack framework. They analyze which technique is used in the ransomware. So if you use this data, we can compare our original heat map and the outside of the report. So if you compare about it, we say the ransomware A, we are resilient, maybe ransom B is not resilient in our environment. We can leverage the outside of the data. So this is why that we try to use the MITRE attack visualization in here. Thirdly, about the compromise assessment. The compromise assessment is basically using the fast forensic techniques or PowerShell or log analysis technique. We have an intensive analysis to discover the indicator of a compromise or enabler of the compromise via security telemetry. This is a kind of a typical generalized compromise assessment result. Of course, data is dummy, but it's basically we review some sort of the IOC indicator of the compromise. Of course, there is an indicator of the compromise, which means that we start the investigation. The CISA team is working on it. But on the contrary, also it's review the enabler of a compromise. For example, admin tool usage or potentially unwanted program. For example, here's the non-standardized VPN. Actually, a type of the VPN software exists in the 3021 devices, for example, or maybe we review the vulnerability existence. If there's a 500,000 vulnerability overall, this is the kind of understand the situation of the vulnerability management. So actually, if you say the 500,000 vulnerability there, and the device number is the 2,500, averagely, which means that 214 vulnerability per devices. this is one of a good indicator to understand the security posture. Actually, I'm working on the Tokio Marine Holding. From the holding side, we try to understand each group company security postures. If we understand that one, if we use this kind of average number of the vulnerability, we can compare the group company and understand the situation of the group company. Also, another thing we can do that in terms of the account management, for example, 32 of the user has a domain admin privileges. It is not recommended situation, but we'd like to use these kind of the numbers as a KPI. Also, we'd like to use much more clearly used as the clear set goal. And actually, there's a bunch of the commercial services there. Also, if you're doing by yourself, we can leverage the threat hunting tools or fast forensic tools. Of course, there's a couple of the tools available. Also, there's a good presentation of the new tools here. Also, I just shared the kind of one of the Japanese security professionals created the Hayabusa is one of the another tool, the threat hunting tools. But there's a bunch of the options to do that. The last three, we'd like to mention about it, kind of a result exploitation. What I mean is that how to utilize the result. As I mentioned about it, for example, number of the vulnerability per device is one of a good indicator. Also, if we have the data, we can create some sort of clear KPI for the senior leadership or CISO, actually. And it's a very scientific approach. Another one is we'd like to utilize the cyber hygiene hunting mechanism to the security due diligence. Actually, if we do the merger and the acquisition, we do the due diligence. What I mean is try to understand, check the situation of the IT or security. So in the merger and the acquisition process, we do the IT DD or security DD. But actually, the checklist, as I mentioned about it, cannot reveal some portion. So we utilize the cyber hygiene hunting approach partially to understand the situation in the merger and the acquisition processes. So wrap up here. So today I'd like to share the concept of the cyber hygiene hunting. It's very powerful and to be the adaptive. We shared a couple of the concepts, which is the enabler of the compromise, continuous monitoring, and the continuous improvement, and also pyramid of the gain. So we also put the example in the real world. Key takeaway here is that we definitely recommend to do the cyber hygiene hunting. It's kind of the scientific approach and data-driven approach. It visualizes the security posture clearly. Thank you for listening.